That's weird.
And Mr. Durst is present, and Mr. DeGuerin, and Mr. Chesnoff, Mr. Ray. We have Mr. Lewin, Bailey, and Mia Henderson, and Milius. And Mr. Lewis is in the back. So a couple things. As I've told all counsel, we have now a new policy in the court with the changing of pandemic conditions. Social distancing isn't required any longer. Thus, I will be inviting jurors to take seats in the jury box. I'm going to encourage them as much as possible to do that, but I do feel a sense of obligation to those who have agreed to this comeback and have been accustomed to that distance. I don't know if everyone's vaccinated. That might make a difference to them. The masks are a protection from those of us who are vaccinated, of course, probably don't need to worry, but the concern is an ascertainment of, we don't have a way to ascertain who is vaccinated and who is not, thus we may have unvaccinated people together. The masks are thus still required. So I am going to invite them to be in the jury box where they ought to be. That means that we're going to be able to fully, we'll be able to admit public and media, only one camera, but still. So I will be doing that. I'll be talking with the jurors. I'm actually going to come down and talk to them from the lectern. And now, Mr. Lewin, you wanted to bring an issue to my attention before we brought the jurors in.
Yes, Your Honor. On Thursday, when we were last in court, I noticed that at 2:30 p.m., Mr. Durst's bag was all the way full. This brings up a number of issues. First of all, I had asked him and his attorneys, I had said that it needed to be changed, and they informed me that if I wanted to do that, they were certainly appreciative. And Mr. Durst was asked. He said he did not want it changed. I had the opportunity over the weekend to look at some footage from court, and there were 3 different occasions that I was able to see in the last 2 weeks where Mr. Durst either deliberately held up his bag to the jury or maneuvered his seat to take away the cover so the jury could see his bag. Why is that important? Because Mr. Durst is on record, and in fact has previously done this before, has admitted to deliberately attempting to increase sympathy with jurors in the public by displaying either his shunt, by shaving his head before arraignment in New Orleans, by lowering his chair in Galveston for the trial, things like that. And so my concern is number one, there's a legitimate need where this bag needs to be drained during the day. The problem is that if the bag fills up all the way, especially with his bladder cancer, there can certainly be a risk of infection. And although I'm sure, because I noticed at the beginning of the day, his bag is almost empty. So it's a normal process that it's going to fill up. But if at 2:30 it's full, and he's not going to get back until much later than that, it needs to be drained by somebody over the lunch hour, whether Mr. Durst wants it drained or not. And draining, just so it's clear, Your Honor, does not involve doing anything to Mr. Durst. It involves simply holding the bag over a toilet and releasing the valve on the bag, and it drains out. So we would ask that that be done, number one, because it should be done to ensure that Mr. Durst is able to be present during this trial going forward. And number two, because I want to make sure that that bag is not utilized as a prop by Mr. Durst in an attempt to incur sympathy for himself, etc.
All right, thank you, Mr. Lewin. Do you need to say anything, Mr. DeGuerin?
Well, that's a pretty good example of why we shouldn't be in trial, Your Honor. He's in need of medical attention. We're unable to get the urology consultation timely. The cardiology consultation has been canceled, or it's just a hi, how are you, and no examination and all that sort of thing. So we're very concerned about his medical condition. It's not fake. The doctors placed that tube, and I'm not a doctor. Mr. Lewin's not a doctor, and I think that whatever care that he needs to be done by the doctors.
All right, well, changing a bag isn't really a medical procedure, but Mr. Durst is standing. Perhaps he wishes to be recognized. Do you want him to speak?
I don't know why he's standing, Your Honor. I haven't
Well,
conversed with him.
all right.
Tell us what he wants to do.
Demonstrating he's able to stand, so I'm glad for that. And I don't, as far as Mr. Lewin's comments about eliciting sympathy, if that's something the jury might have observed during the trial, Mr. Lewin might comment about that during his argument. As far as Mr. Durst's health, I'll make inquiries as to what we can do to have his bag changed so that there's no risk of infection.
Your Honor, I did speak to Mr. Garcia over the weekend, and Mr. Garcia said that potentially I volunteered to show him what he would need to do, and they can drain it. It's a 1-minute procedure to just empty it at lunch, and that will eliminate the issue.
I see. Mr. Garcia represents Mr. Durst also, but not
Yes.
in a criminal matter. Did he wish to
He does
communicate?
wish to speak, Your Honor.
Of course. Yes, Mr. Durst, you may speak.
Mr. Lewin is incorrect. I am not seeking sympathy from the jury. My head is shaved. This is the only kind of haircut I'm able to get in the jail. In terms of the way he talks about in Galveston, the DA said I lowered my chair so I would look little. Everybody thought that was ridiculous. I put the chair at a height that was convenient for me. In terms of this whole thing about my seeking sympathy and trying to harm myself with my catheter bag, I have been doing everything possible to get the doctors at CTC to remove the bag. I don't want to have the catheter at all. This issue about emptying the bag is something Mr. Lewin is raising. I don't think it's meaningful. I would request the court, if the court can do so, to encourage the doctors at CTC to remove the catheter, since nobody is willing to tell me why I have a catheter in. Thank you, Your Honor.
You're welcome, Mr. Durst. I will take all of that under consideration. I did talk with the lawyer who represents the medical staff, and I'll be in conversation with her, and I will discuss this issue with her. So with that, thank you. Let's, shall we bring in our jurors, and then I'll speak with them about seating.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Let's do that, and we'll do a formal open, so I'll step aside for a moment. Department 1. All our jurors and alternates are present. Mr. Durst is present with Mr. DeGuerin and Mr. Chesnoff, Mr. Ray, Mr. Lewis, for the people, Mr. Lewin, Mr. Balian, Mr. Miata, Mr. Henderson, Mr. Milius. All right, we have some news and changes. And once again, because it's hard for me to communicate with you from up here, I think, I'm going to come down and chat with you a little bit. So this is good news. And as you know, pandemic circumstances have changed. You pointed to your mask. I wish I could tell you we didn't need masks. We still need masks a little bit longer, but there are some changes. And let me read an announcement from our presiding judge of the Los Angeles Superior Court. Expanding access to justice safely remains the court's top priority. During the pandemic, the court adopted alternative services and solutions to offer safe access to justice. Today, I'm pleased to announce the court is aligning with and responsibly following federal, state, and county public health and Cal OSHA workplace guidance that eliminates social distancing in public spaces. Public health guidance also dictates safety measures, including mask wearing, to protect workers and the public from the spread of the virus and those persons not yet vaccinated. This is a huge step forward in our rise from the pandemic. So this is what this means. We still need the mask to protect, I guess, people for whatever reason are not vaccinated. There's some risk of infection with a vaccination, though it's pretty small, comparable to other risks we take in daily life. So, but still, in order to protect those who are not yet vaccinated, we still need that. But because of the social distancing change, that means a couple of things. First of all, our courts are going to be more open to the public. Everyone has a right to a public trial. So we are going to be bringing more public in. We've only allowed one seat for members of the public, one seat for media, in addition to our camera. That's all we've been able to do in this courtroom, given our social distancing mandate. The great news is we have this beautiful jury box. And I really would like to have you up there. I said from the beginning, I'm so accustomed to, in my own courtroom, Department 81, looking over and being able to glance at you and communicate with you, see how you're doing. Likewise, the lawyers find it easier to communicate with you when you're nearby, and perhaps most importantly, the witnesses are there, more easily audible, more easily visible to you. So it is the courts are designed this way for a reason. We're not designed really with the jurors in the audience. We're designed to have jurors in the jury box. Now, that being said, I cannot emphasize enough how gratified I am, how proud I am of you, that 14 months after we adjourned, you all came back. I mean, to me, that means so much about you and about our system, and the fact that you have and continue to do this important work of judging a criminal case. So I feel obliged to you to respect your space and your comfort. So I am not going to mandate today that you come to the jury box, but I want to invite you to come try it out. Now, if you are uncomfortable, because it's nice to have space. It'd be great if we had a great deep jury box and the plush first-class seats. That'd be cool, but really, that's not realistic. We don't do that. So it is a little bit close. You may feel more comfortable because there still is. We still are in a pandemic. There still is. It's up to you to determine how much risk you might feel or might be willing to take. I think it's pretty safe, but so I'm going to invite each of you in turn. Come up, take seats in the jury box. If you care to remain, I'm going to reseat you, because I really don't want the press or public leaning over you. If you choose to stay here, I could. If I see how many people want to come up, we'll see what we need to do. We'll reseat you, and we'll have a small area for the jurors any jurors who want to remain out here. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to invite you up in turn to take seats and to bring your little clip with you with your seat number, just in case you're not seated sequentially. Yeah. So, all right, great. And then we'll proceed with, I think we have a live witness, and we do have some videotape testimony also awaiting us. Okay. All right, I'll start with juror number 1. Okay. I'll put put you up in seat number 1, and juror number 2, right behind her. Yeah. I think you can, yeah, she can enter in that side. That works. Are we gonna do it that way? Okay. That's fine. And we're backwards, like we're reading Hebrew or something. You know, we go backwards in department. Yeah, I think that would be it. 1 and 2. I'm just so accustomed to reading backwards after so many years, 12 years in my courtroom. Juror number 3, come on up. Juror number 4. Juror number 5. And juror number 6.
If they don't like you, Your Honor, we're happy to move back. That is the best seat.
Okay, juror number 7. Come on.
Keep that attitude.
And we're going to adjust juror number 8 and juror number 9. We're going to adjust these screens also. Juror number 10. Juror 11 and 12. We got room for you now. You're welcome. So alternate number 1, 2, and 3. Or also known as jurors 13, 14, 15. Yeah. Or do we put them on that side? I don't remember. Okay, 13. 16, 17. Oh, you guys are awesome. We'll need to roll one more chair. Here it comes. Here we go. Beautiful.
2 more chairs.
2 more chairs. Okay. Here they come. We're going to pass them down for you.
Can you do one out the back?
Okay. We got.
Just one.
Yeah. We'll give you a video feed from that room. Here they come.
Not yet.
Where would you like to be, Your Honor?
Yeah, but we may need more for the lawyers. I thought we'd put 19. I think if you're down below, this next to the step, I don't want to block that exit. So, but I think if you are, yeah, that's good. That's fine.
Your Honor, we're not going to scare them and let them think we have to give another opening.
Yeah, why not opening statements from time to time? That could be done.
Right.
Now, you folks are awesome. It's so nice to see you just right here. It's really wonderful. You good? Okay, we need a couple more chairs for lawyers. It's particularly hard for me to see over on that side, so it's really, it's like, I remember you guys.
Yeah.
one more, do we lose Mr. Chestnut? You good?
Yeah, we're good.
All right. Let's get back to it. So, got a friend on the outside, Mr. Lewin?
What's that, Your Honor?
No, I was teasing you.
Get off your phone.
Teenager here.
I have a teenager, so yeah. I recognize the behavior. All right, I understand that we're going to interrupt that videotaped testimony to present testimony of a person who's present today.
We are, Your Honor, although first, Mr. Balian has about 20 minutes, I think, of stipulations, and then we're going to call a live witness.
20 minutes?
Well, it's not all stipulations. There's some video as well.
Oh, stipulations and videos.
Correct. One video.
And then our
Yes,
witness.
yes.
Very well, because it makes sense to present them before the witness testifies.
Yes.
Sort of lays the groundwork.
Well, it connects back up to where we were before. I just follow what Mr. Balian tells me.
No, right. I think if it's logical. Now, you want that witness to be outside during those stipulations?
The witness isn't here anyway.
Okay, very good. All right, with that, Mr. Balian, you may present the stipulations.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, it's back to the way things used to be. It's great. Your Honor, I have a stipulation. May I mark this as People's 175? We'll get the original stipulation. It's stipulation 9 originally.
Yes.
May I read it?
Yes.
Counsel, we stipulate to the following. In the year 2000, Rhea Ioannidis, Ioannidis, was employed as a secretary for the Beverly Hills Police Department. One of Ms. Ioannidis' work responsibilities was to collect and distribute mail that was received at the Beverly Hills Police Department. On December 27, 2000, the Beverly Hills Police Department received a sealed envelope in the U.S. mail. The envelope was addressed as follows: Beverly Hills Police. Ms. Ioannidis collected this envelope and gave it to Sergeant Robert Curtis. The document, marked for identification previously as People's Exhibit 128, is the envelope Rhea Ioannidis received. The document marked for identification previously as People's Exhibit 129 is the letter that was contained within People's Exhibit 128 when it was received by Ms. Ioannidis at the Beverly Hills Police Department. So stipulated?
Court accepts stipulated.
Your Honor, we have a stipulated video. Yep. And this is the testimony of Sergeant Robert Curtis of the Beverly Hills Police Department. It's 12 minutes. Yeah. Pardon my reach, Dave. Scoot over. Does, I'm a bit closer. Does anyone want a transcript? Or? Your Honor, one of the jurors inquired whether we could turn this screen towards them. Given my luck with the TVs, I will.
Does the sparkle just come?
I'm happy to do it with several people, just slide it. We would just need to rotate it without hitting juror number 13 in the head.
You took this
Go ahead.
job,
Go ahead, but,
we took this job because there was supposed to be no heavy lifting.
yeah, yeah. Do not harm a juror.
Okay. Just, yeah, it is.
Is that good?
I'm not sure how comfortable.
No,
No,
it's good.
it's good.
It's good for now. We'll get that sorted out.
Is that good for everybody?
I'm not sure how good it is for the juror who's below it.
I think that's
That's
Okay,
why,
let's do this. Let's just push it.
yeah, I think you need to turn it more.
don't worry about it.
Yeah, I don't want people hitting their head on it. You guys,
How many more?
I can spin it like a fan. Exactly.
that's going into my joke file. How many lawyers does it take?
Oh,
to move it?
I already said that one.
Did you?
Yes, I did.
You're funny.
It was actually how many district attorneys. Yeah, that's
I don't know. Let me check with the jurors. Is that okay for you? Is that okay for the jurors under it? Is that okay?
Yeah.
For now? Okay? You want what?
I don't have a call.
Okay. Yes, you may
Your Honor?
proceed. Yes.
I have a DVD of the videotape stipulated conditional exam we're about to play. My mark this as People's 176. And the transcript is 176A, Your Honor.
Okay. Yes.
And then we will play the video.
Call
Wait, stop.
Robert
Stop.
Durst.
Your Honor, I apologize. I don't know if I did, but the stipulation is 175.
You got that, yes.
I did? Okay.
Call Robert Durst.
You solemnly state that the testimony about to give in the confidential before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes, I do.
Please be seated. You're up to the mic, please. The mic, please state and spell your first and last name.
My name is Robert Curtis, R-V-E-R-T-C-U-R-G-I-S.
Everything? Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
What is your current occupation?
I'm retired.
For how long have you been retired?
I've been retired since April of 2009.
And from what career are you retired from?
I retired from the Beverly Hills Police Department.
The witness was sworn, correct? Thank you. So, were you a sworn peace officer?
Yes,
And for how many years were you a sworn peace officer?
for almost 38 years.
Can you, what is your age today?
My age today, 74.
Can you describe for the court your What positions you held in law enforcement?
Yes. In 1972, I started as a reserve patrol deputy sheriff. In 1977, I went to Beverly Hills Police Department. I worked patrol, traffic, detectives, and when I retired, I was the assistant chief of police. After I retired, I went to the city of Bell Gardens for almost a year as the chief of police, interim chief of police.
Okay.
I want to make it clear, it was Bell Gardens, it was not Bell.
Not the city of Bell, but Bell Gardens.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying. Important distinction, I guess, today, right?
It is.
Okay. When you say you were the assistant chief of police, what does that mean? What's that position?
Well, you have, in Beverly Hills is a relatively medium-sized department. There are 3 captains, assistant chief of police, and the chief of police. And I supervised the captains, and when the chief was not there, I also acted as acting chief of police many times.
Okay. So you were the number 2 person?
Yes.
What was the size of that police force at the time?
At the time, it was between 130 and 140 officers.
Okay. And then you said you actually became, for some period of time, the chief of Bell Gardens.
Yes, I did.
What was the size of that?
About 65 sworn.
Okay. And so you were the head of that agency?
Yes.
What were your duties in December of 2000? What was your position?
I was a police captain, and I'm trying to remember what division I was in. I think I was in the field operations division at the time.
Okay. And you were a captain in the field operations division at Beverly Hills Police Department?
Yes.
All right. For how many years as of then have you held that position of captain?
I was promoted to captain in 1990.
Okay. So approximately 10 years?
At that time, yes.
Can you briefly describe to the court what your duties were as captain in December of 2000?
Yes. At that time, I oversaw the patrol division, the traffic division, and our tactical division. And when other captains were off, then I would assume some of their responsibilities depending on what may have arisen while they were off.
Okay. And how many captains were generally on duty at one time?
If we were all there, it was 3. At the least, probably 2.
Okay. And if something out of the ordinary were to occur within that police department during that period of time, how confident are you, if you are at all, that it would have been brought to the attention of one captain?
It would have been brought to the attention of a captain. I would insist on that.
Are you familiar with a woman by the name of Ria, R-I-A, Ioannidis, I-O-N-N-I-D-I-S?
Yes, I am. She was an administrative clerk in the police department, functionally serving as sort of a secretary for the captain.
And what were some of her duties? Sorry, when you said function of the captain, was she one of your secretaries?
Yes.
What were some of her duties?
Work in the administrative offices, they would answer telephones, they would receive mail. Unless it was confidential, they would open mail. Other duties as assigned in the office. Type things for us and send us home.
Would she collect mail for the Beverly Hills Police Department?
Yes.
And would she distribute that in the appropriate places?
Yes, she would.
If there was a letter that came in that was addressed to the Beverly Hills Police Department, and it was received by a letter carrier of the U.S. Postal Service, would Ria Ioannidis have been one of the people who would have collected and distributed?
She would have been one of the people, yes.
And if she had received a piece of mail that was out of the ordinary, based on her job duties, who would she have shown?
Depending on what was in the letter, she probably would have shown it to one of the captains, which would be one of her bosses. And that day, she opened this letter and brought it to me.
Okay. So I'm going to take you to December 27th of the year 2000.
Yes, sir.
Did Ms. Ioannidis, Ria Ioannidis, bring you an envelope and a letter?
Yes, she did.
And did she show it to you?
Yes. I remember it because it was unusual. I saw a lot of letters, but this was very unusual. It was addressed only to the police department, no address, and the content inside was quite short and very unusual.
Okay. Do you recall what the address was on the outside of the envelope?
It said Beverly Hills Police Department. I don't think it had any numbers or our address at all on it.
Okay. And do you remember anything distinctive about any of the spelling?
Yes, I do. Beverly Hills was misspelled. It's not usually spelled B-E-V-E-R-L-Y, but on this particular letter, it was spelled B-E-V-E-R-L-E-Y.
Okay. Other than those words, Beverly Hills Police, were there any other written words on the envelope that you recall?
Not that I recall.
And the letter itself, what do you recall about the letter?
It's quite short. It had an address on Benedict Canyon, and it had the word cadaver. It got my attention because the address on Benedict Canyon was in the Beverly Hills post office area, but it was not in the Beverly Hills city, so we could not have jurisdiction there. But that's what caught my eye, that this was not our incident.
Okay. Were there other times while you were employed in law enforcement that you received any letters that had the word cadaver on them?
Not that I recall.
Okay, so was this out of the ordinary for you?
Certainly.
Do you have a distinct memory of seeing this letter on December 27th, the year 2000?
Yes, I do.
What did you do with the letter in the envelope?
Contacted the detective division, and Detective Craig Stevens responded to the office, and we gave him the letter.
And did you advise him of who, if anyone, he should contact to provide that letter envelope?
Yes, first of all, I was very careful. I didn't touch the letter, so in case there was any evidence or fingerprints on it, I didn't want mine on there. And we discussed it and advised him that he should contact not only his supervisors, but Los Angeles Police Department.
Okay, and why is it that you were directed to the Los Angeles Police Department?
Because the address 1527, I believe it was in the city of Los Angeles jurisdiction.
Okay. And is Detective Stevens currently alive?
No, Detective Stevens is deceased.
I'm going to show you what's previously been marked as People's 24 in these proceedings. Do you recognize that envelope?
Yes, I do.
How do you recognize it?
By the way it's spelled, and it has the word Beverly Hills Police, and it's misspelled.
Okay. And is this the envelope that was shown to you on December 27th, the year 2000?
Yes, it appears to be.
And I'm showing you what's previously been marked in these proceedings as People's 25. You recognize that note?
Yes, I do.
Is that the note that was shown to you by Ms. Godinez on December 27th of the year 2000?
Yes, it was.
When she showed you this envelope, People's 24, and this letter, People's 25, were they all connected to each other physically?
I'm trying to remember. I didn't touch it, and I believe it might have been paper clipped to the envelope. So you could hold the envelope and not the paper.
Your Honor, I have a photograph of a note, and it's in color. My mark is People's 53.
Yes.
Thank you. Chief, I'm going to show you what's previously been marked, or what has been now marked as People's 53. Do you recognize People's 53?
Yes.
Is this a color copy of the letter that was shown to you by Ms. Godinez on December 27th of the year 2000?
I don't see the color, but it's a copy of the letter, yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I guess there's some color on the border there. I see. I didn't see the color.
On your screen didn't look color. If you actually look at the actual document, is this a fair and accurate copy of the letter you saw on December 27th, 2000?
Yes.
I guess I should just ask you for the record. Equals 24, is that a fair and accurate copy of the outside of the envelope?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Good morning, sir.
Would you prefer I address you as Chief Curtis?
That's fine. Or Robert, whatever you want to find out.
Thank you very
I'll
much.
answer up there.
Thank you very much for respect, Chief.
Thank you.
I just have one thing I want to clarify. You would agree with me, would you not, Chief, that whoever caused this letter to be sent wanted Susan Berman to be found?
I can't speculate on their motive, but certainly send a letter like that and say there's a cadaver at a certain location would indicate they were hiding it. I can't speak what's in the mind of the person who wrote the letter. Exactly.
You would certainly say it's reasonable that that would be done.
I would think so.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Anything else?
No, thank you.
Your excuse.
Your Honor, I have a exhibit sheet that correlates the exhibits from the video to the exhibits at this trial. I mark this as People's 176B.
Yeah.
The exhibits referenced in the video as People's 24 in this trial has been marked previously as People's 130.
Thank you.
The exhibit referenced in the video as People's 25 is also contained on what has been marked in this trial as People's 130. The exhibit referenced in the video as People's 53 is currently in this trial People's 131A.
Thank you. And I need that transcript.
Can we get an additional one?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
What's next, Mr. Balian?
Thank you, Your Honor. I have a stipulation, it's previous stipulation 10. May I mark this as People's 177?
Yes.
On December 29th of the year 2000, Los Angeles Police Department Detective Brad Roberts received People's Exhibits 129, the letter, and 128, the envelope, from Detective Craig Stevens of the Beverly Hills Police Department. Detective Roberts booked these items into evidence at the LAPD under DR number 00-08-25485 as evidence item numbers 21 and 22. The postmark on Exhibit 128, the envelope, was as follows: Marina Del Rey, CA 90268, PM 23 December 2000. So stipulated?
Stipulated.
I have stipulation. I mark this as People's 178, Your Honor.
Yes.
In the year 2000, all mail that was deposited into a U.S. mail receptacle on the west side of Los Angeles, including the areas of Beverly Hills, Pacific Palisades, Palos Verdes, Inglewood, Santa Monica, Compton, and Torrance, would have been processed at the United States Postal Service, USPS, Marina Del Rey sorting facility. Susan Berman's home, 1527 Benedict Canyon, was included in this area. The postmark contained on People's 128 establishes that the envelope was processed at the USPS Marina Del Rey sorting facility between 3 p.m. and 11:59 p.m. on December 23rd, 2000, and was therefore deposited into a USPS receptacle in the west side of Los Angeles on or before December 23rd of the year 2000. So stipulated?
Stipulated.
Accept the stipulation. Thank you.
We have another stipulation, Your Honor?
Yes.
I think he clarified, but just to make sure, that was stipulation number 11.
Yes. And this stipulation I'm about to read is stipulation 44. Your Honor, before I do that, I have a plastic bag, and inside this plastic bag is an evidence tag as well as a piece of paper. May I mark this plastic evidence bag and its contents as People's 179?
Yeah.
I'm going to place People's 179 on the Alma.
Wolf vision.
Wolf, I'm sorry, yes, you're right. I have a stipulation, I mark this as People's 180. This is previous stipulation 44. All right. Counsel, do you stipulate as follows? Defendant Robert Durst wrote the documents marked for identification as People's Exhibits 128 and 129, commonly referred to as the cadaver note and cadaver envelope. The parties further stipulate that defendant wrote portions of the document marked for identification as People's Exhibit 179, commonly referred to as the dig note. With respect to the dig note, defendant wrote the portions of the document which are handwritten. The hand-printed portions, which appear in the margins to the right of the handwritten list, were written by Tom Hughes after Mr. Hughes found the document in the bedroom trash can of defendant's South Salem home. Tom Hughes also circled the word dig after he found the document. So stipulated, counsel?
Stipulated.
Court accepts the stipulation.
Thank you, Your Honor. That will take care of the stipulations. I'm going to place People's 179 back in this envelope. Plastic sheathing. Thank you.
All right, next.
People call Douglas Durst, Your Honor.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly state that the testimony you may give in the pause now pending before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Thank you, sir. Please be seated. For the record, please state and spell your first and last name, please.
Douglas Durst.
Thank you.
State your name.
Douglas Durst.
And you speak into that microphone, right up to your mask, right up to that, right up to the microphone, and you can be heard clearly at that. When you do that. Okay?
Okay.
Good. You may proceed.
Thank you. Mr. Durst, how do you feel about being in court today?
I'm not particularly happy about it. Other places I'd much rather be.
And when you say you're not particularly happy about it, can you explain what you mean by that?
Well, I'm here at my brother's trial, and it's not a pleasant experience to be at this trial of somebody I've known for 76 years now, and it's very difficult from many points of view.
Is it fair to say that over the years you've had many issues with your brother?
That's very fair to say. My brother and I fought as children, and we never got along. And
That's narrative not responsive.
I'm going to go into more detail in a moment, Mr. Durst. What I'm basically asking you is, despite the issues that you've had with your brother, is it still difficult to be up there testifying against him in a murder trial?
yes, it's very difficult. Somebody that, as I said, that I've known for 76 years, and my older brother being here is not anything that's pleasant from any point of view.
So I'm going to ask you to listen carefully to the question and answer only the question.
Yes, sir.
And let me ask you, Mr. Durst, are you here today voluntarily because this is what you want to do, or were you told that if you did not come, you would be subpoenaed?
I'm not here voluntarily, and I was subpoenaed to come here. Yes.
That being said, once you were told that you were going to be subpoenaed, have you cooperated fully in terms of being interviewed and agreeing to come out to court without a formal subpoena?
Yes, I cooperated once I was told that I would be subpoenaed. I cooperated without being subpoenaed.
So I'm going to ask you a number of questions today. If there's anything you do not understand, please let the court know. I'm going to start with, do you recognize this person here?
My brother Bob, yes.
Indicating the defendant, Your Honor?
Yeah.
And can you tell me, how do you generally refer to your brother?
It's Bob.
And what is the age difference between you and Bob?
Approximately a year and a half.
And who is older?
Bob is older.
And if you can you tell me how many other siblings do you have, and what are the age breakdowns?
I have a sister who's 3 years younger and a brother who is 5 years younger.
And so, in essence, there are 4 kids in roughly 7 years?
Yeah, yes, that's correct.
With Bob being the oldest, is that right?
That is right, yes.
And Mr. Durst, what do you do for a living?
I work in real estate in a family business.
And that family business, that's called the Durst Organization, is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
And can you explain, when was that business originally founded?
The business was, 1915 was when it was started.
And can you tell me, is it a publicly owned business?
No, it's all owned by family.
And when you say that it was started, who started it?
My grandfather, Joseph Durst, bought his first building in 1915.
And Joseph Durst, was he somebody who was raised with a degree of wealth?
No, he was raised in a very poor village in Eastern Europe.
And when did he come to the United States?
I think that, around 1898, just before the turn of the century.
And did Joseph have any children?
Joseph had 5 children.
And was one of those children Seymour Durst, your father?
Yes, Seymour was
The Durst organization that your grandfather founded more than 100 years ago, has it grown?
It's grown dramatically, yes.
And how large is it today?
We in New York, we own 13 million square feet of Class A offices, 2,500 apartments, and various developments in New York, and developments under progress in New York and in Philadelphia.
And is it fair to say that with respect to New York, particularly Manhattan, that the Durst organization is one of the principal owners of commercial real estate in Manhattan?
Yes, that is fair to say.
Can I ask you, in terms of the Durst organization itself, are there other entities within the Durst organization?
There are dozens of entities within the organization.
And when I say Van Dorn Realty or Eastern Pork, are those names that you recognize?
Yes, I recognize those names.
And can you tell me what those names represent?
Van Dorn Realty was the company that my father and uncles founded in the 50s when they began developing office buildings. And it was named for where my uncle went to Army camp.
And what about Eastern Pork?
Eastern Pork was a company that my father started to hide the identity of the purchaser of property that he was assembling, because he felt no one would suspect him of being Jewish with owning a pork product company.
When your father and grandfather were building the company, did they face anti-Semitism in New York?
Yes, that's why they named the management company Van Dorn Realty, so they would not be associated with a Jewish family.
So the idea that Van Dorn doesn't sound very Jewish, and Eastern Pork, Jews keep kosher, the Eastern Pork name would kind of hide the idea that it was a Jewish family that was behind it.
Yes, that is correct.
In terms of Van Dorn Realty, was that you and your brother Bob's employer in the late 70s and early 80s?
Yes, that was our employer.
And can you tell me what were your responsibilities there?
My responsibilities varied as time went on. In the very beginning, I was responsible for and stayed responsible for the properties that were bought to be developed. It was called brick management. And when we were assembling sites, we had buildings that had to be kept going until they were to be demolished. So it was a difficult job. Later, I became more responsible for collecting arrears and negotiating leases.
Do you remember, when did you first start working for the Durst organization or one of its subsidiaries?
I started in the summer of 1966.
And briefly, what is your educational background?
I graduated from University of California at Berkeley in '66 and went to NYU in 1967 for 2 years, and then went full-time to the organization, but was working part-time while I was going to NYU.
And what did you study at NYU?
I was at the School of Public Administration in Urban Economics.
And can you tell me, what were your brother Bob's responsibilities at Van Dorn Realty in the late 70s and early 80s?
He shared many of the same responsibilities that I did, and he also negotiated leases. It was sometimes a dispute as to who was going to be responsible, but we were not very involved in the main business until later in the 80s.
And historically, has the Durst, for lack of a better term, the Durst family fortune, has that historically been tied up in family trusts?
Yes, it's now completely tied up in family trusts.
And the Durst organization still today is a privately held family corporation, is that correct?
That is correct.
So meaning that you can't buy stock in it, it's not public?
That's correct.
And can you tell me, the Durst Family Trust, just very briefly, is it fair to say that those family trusts still control the ownership and the running of the Durst organization itself?
They control all the ownership. Indirectly, they control the running of the company.
Does your brother Bob currently have any ownership interest in any of these family trusts?
He does not.
And was he bought out at his request?
Yes, he was bought out at his request.
And approximately when was this?
That was 2006.
And without going into all the financial details, did this buyout amount to tens of millions of dollars?
Yes, it did amount to that.
Has there always been an individual who is a family member, who is a trustee, who is in essence running the family trusts?
There are two family members, and theoretically they run the family trust, but typically one of them is preeminent.
And so, just so it's clear, I'm going to call that person, in the way that we're discussing this, I'm going to call them the preeminent trustee, just so you understand what I'm saying. Who was the preeminent trustee of your father's generation?
My father was.
And how many brothers and sisters were in that second generation did your father have?
He had 4 brothers and 1 sister.
And were other members of that second generation, were they also involved in the Durst organization?
3 of them were, 2 of them were active members of the company, and my aunt, my father's sister, was an owner but did not participate in the running of the company.
And the 2 active people, would that have been your Uncle Royal, and your father Seymour?
Well, I'm sorry, there were 3 active. There were, in addition to my father, my Uncle Roy and my Uncle David were active in the business.
And was one of those 3 and here I said what I was going to call it, and I forgot the name that
Preeminent.
Yeah, preeminent. Thanks, Dave. Who was the preeminent trustee of that generation?
My father was.
And is there only one of these preeminent trustees at a time?
Yes.
Who is the preeminent trustee today?
I am.
And when did you become the preeminent trustee?
At my father's death in 1995.
And were you aware, originally, was there a succession plan in terms of who originally was supposed to assume that preeminent trustee position?
The trusts were created in 1962, and at that point the oldest member of the existing trustee's family was appointed as the successor trustee.
And was the plan that your brother Bob was going to take over as the preeminent trustee?
Yes, as the oldest member of the family, yes.
I'm going to get to this later, but that did not end up happening. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, I want to talk about you and your brother for a moment. Did the 2 of you ever have a good relationship?
We had a relationship where we could talk to each other, but it was always very wary and strained.
Growing up, how did your brother treat you?
He treated me miserably. He would fight with me every chance. He would embarrass me at every opportunity. And it was a very difficult relationship.
And were you able to observe how your brother treated your younger brother Tom and your sister Wendy?
He treated them equally bad, always attacking them or holding them up to ridicule.
Growing up, was it a common situation for you to cry in front of your brother?
Yes.
And what would his response be?
He thought it was funny.
What is your current relationship with your brother?
I don't have a current relationship.
And when is the last time the 2 of you had any contact at all?
The last time I saw him was in 2001 at my nephew's wedding.
And that was a wedding that took place in Texas just before, you would find out later, Morris Black ended up being killed. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And in terms of you having contact with your brother, was that the 2 of you sitting down and talking, or was that simply the 2 of you being at the same event?
2 of us being at the same event.
When is the last time you actually had any contact where the 2 of you spoke?
I think in 1999.
Are you aware if your brother was ever close to any of your other siblings?
He was never close. My sister tried to have a relationship with him.
And are you aware of specifically when it was that you and your brother ended up, in essence, ceasing any contact? When you kind of lost contact with the family, was there a timing, an incident?
It was in 1994 when I became president of the Durst organization.
And by the way, when you became president of the Durst organization, was that a significant event within the area, the field of kind of New York real estate?
Oh, absolutely. It was. Seymour had been there for so many years, and for somebody new, fairly young, to be stepping up was quite an event.
And was that publicized within the media in New York at the time?
Yes, it was publicized.
I want you to assume that an individual is active in New York real estate in the mid-90s. If they were active in New York real estate, would your ascension to that position have been something that they would have read about in the real estate trade papers?
Yes, anybody in real estate would have known about it.
I want to specifically ask you, do you know who Doug Oliver is?
I do.
Who is Doug Oliver?
Doug Oliver was a friend of Bob's, and he owned some property along with his in-laws, which bordered on property we owned.
Is it fair to say that Mr. Oliver's property interests were not of the same magnitude as the Durst family?
It's very fair to say that they were nowhere near the same magnitude as the Durst family.
And did you yourself and your family, the Durst organization, have dealings with Mr. Oliver with respect to real estate?
At one point, we had discussion. His father-in-law was a man named Hanson, who was funding Doug's investment, and we dealt with them very briefly in a proposed building that never happened.
And based on the relationship you had with Mr. Oliver, was Mr. Oliver aware that you had ascended and were running the Durst organization?
I would have to believe he did, but I had no specific knowledge.
I want to ask you for a moment, historically, if I were to describe, how was your brother with money in terms of his level of generosity?
He's not a very generous person, very tight with money, and spends as little as possible.
And what leads you to that conclusion regarding how your brother is with money? Is that based on your firsthand knowledge?
Based on my firsthand knowledge of how cheap he is and things that he's done in my knowledge to try and save money.
What in particular are those things? I only want to talk about things that you are personally aware of that he has done.
I'm personally aware that he had a Volkswagen car that he was selling.
Objection, relevancy, remote.
Overruled.
Charlie?
I've overruled the objection, ma'am.
I don't hear well with my right ear, so I could ask.
I don't project very well through my mask. My apologies, go ahead.
Anyway, he was selling a car, and he spent an enormous amount of time with a drill backing up the odometer on the car to get a better price out of it.
And when was this?
This must have been in the 1970s.
And did your brother, as well as yourself, did you have large trust funds?
We had trusts. We received an income from it.
And I don't want to get into the exact number, but is it fair to say that you received a sizable income in your brother from the trust?
Yes.
Based on your knowledge of your brother at that point, did the actual price of what he was going to sell the Volkswagen, would that have made a difference?
Would not have made any difference.
That is leading and remote and not relevant.
Okay.
Something that happened in the 70s.
Okay, so overruled, but I think you've exhausted the topic. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. Were you ever aware of your brother giving large sums of money to his friends?
I was never aware of that.
Basis of knowledge.
Overruled?
No, I was never aware of him giving anybody money.
Given your experience with your brother, would it be consistent with the Bob Durst you know to give large sums of money to friends without an ulterior motive?
Conclusion, leaving.
Conclusion is not the objection, but it's speculative.
Doesn't he have to get the objection, Your Honor, or no?
No, I'm going to sustain
I'll
it.
take
It's a
his
related
ground.
A witness may often offer a conclusion. That's not itself objectionable. It's reaching it through speculation, which is the problem, and that's a problem I see with that question. So you may continue.
Thank you. Who was Seymour Durst?
Seymour Durst was my father.
And what kind of father was Seymour Durst?
He was a wonderful father.
If I were to ask you, was he in general a strict parent?
He wasn't. He had a strict moral code, but he was not strict with us in the sense that we were punished or punished, I would say.
In particular, based on your observations, was he strict with your brother Bob?
No, not at all.
Is it fair to say that he was the opposite of strict with Bob?
Very fair. He is opposite.
Leading.
The question is being asked in a leading way so that,
Okay.
Your Honor, I get a yes or no and not specific incidents.
Yeah, I'll allow it.
Sorry.
I'm allowing the answer.
Your Honor, did the court, we were talking to, I'm not sure if they got the answer. Can the witness answer the question so it's clear?
He said that you asked if it was the opposite. He said that's very fair to say, and that will stand.
Thank you. Have you ever seen the movie All Good Things?
I've seen parts of it.
In the parts that you've seen, or in the script, if you reviewed it, was that an accurate portrayal of your father?
Completely inaccurate portrayal of Seymour.
And what was inaccurate about the way your father was portrayed?
He was portrayed as being very strict, very overbearing and demanding, and anybody who knew my father knew that that's not what he was.
In the movie, would you agree that the inference was that Seymour Durst forced your brother Bob against his will to come work for the Durst organization?
That was the inference, and it's completely untrue.
And when you say that it's untrue, is that because you were speculating and you have firsthand knowledge?
My father never asked any of us to do something that we did not want to do.
Tell me for a moment about your mother.
My mother died when I was 5, so I have very little accurate recollections of her.
Can you tell me when she died in terms of the year?
1950.
And can you tell me how it was that she died?
She fell
Basis
from
of knowledge.
I'm sorry?
He said he was 5 years old when it happened. It's basis of knowledge.
Overruled.
She fell from the roof of our house
And where were you living at that time?
in Scarsdale, New York.
And are you aware that your brother Bob has claimed that your father had him view your mom falling or jumping from the roof? Are you aware of that allegation?
I am aware of that allegation.
And do you know if
sorry,
that...
Objection.
Incorrect's not...
Or did you just did you say something?
Incorrect, it's hearsay.
Incorrect. Okay, that's overruled, but let's see. Are you aware of okay, overruled.
You can answer the question. Do you want me to repeat it?
Please.
You are aware that your brother Bob has claimed that your dad had him view your mom falling / jumping from the roof. Are you aware of that allegation from your brother?
I am aware of that allegation.
And do you have firsthand knowledge of whether that allegation is true?
I know it's not true because when my mother was in distress, we were brought over to my aunt and uncle's house nearby.
And can you tell me, you are aware of the way your brother has described having seen this fall or jump, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And given the way the house was laid out and where your brother says he was, is that an accurate depiction of what happened?
No, there's no way from inside the house you could see where my mother fell from.
And is that something you have personal knowledge of from having lived in this house?
Yes, it is.
And how long did you live in that house?
Till I was about 16 or 17.
I want to go now to Kathy Durst. Is that someone that you ever met?
Yes, I did meet Kathy Durst.
And do you remember how it was that the two of you met?
At some point, Bob introduced us. I don't remember the exact point.
And if I were to ask you to describe Kathy, how would you describe her?
She was a lovely person.
And what was your relationship like with her?
We were, she was my sister-in-law. We had a very good relationship.
In terms of your family, would you describe Kathy's involvement, kind of connection to your family, as your family was happy that Bob had married her, or were they upset? What was kind of the family response to
The
Kathy?
family was very happy and very accepting of Kathy.
How did you learn that Bob and Kathy had married?
I don't recall the exact circumstances, but I believe I learned afterwards that they had gotten married, on Bob's 30th birthday.
Did you attend that wedding?
No,
Did you have any knowledge in advance it was going to take place?
no,
And is it fair to say by that point in your lives, the relationship between you and Bob was not a friendly one?
that's correct, yes.
Notwithstanding the status of your relationship, did you and your wife ever live with Bob and Kathy?
Yeah, we shared a house that my father owned in Katona, New York for a couple of years.
And can you describe Katona, New York? Where is that in reference to South Salem, New York?
It's under 10 miles south of it, I believe.
And is Katona also in Westchester County?
Yes, it is.
And you mentioned that your father owned a home in Katona. Is that a home that eventually you ended up taking over?
Yes, it is.
And the period of time where you lived with Bob and Kathy and your wife, when was that?
That was about 1970 through 1973, except, 1973.
And you are married, is that correct?
I am married.
And is the woman you're married to, is that the same woman that you were living with Bob and Kathy?
Yes, it is.
And the two of you have children, is that right?
That is correct.
At the time that you were living with Bob and Kathy, was that before or after you had children?
That was after I had children.
So were the children living with you as well?
Yes.
And can you recall, did you have interaction with Kathy while the two of you lived together during that time?
Yes, we shared the house, we shared the kitchen, and we had interactions all the time.
And if I were to ask you your feelings about Kathy during the period of time when you lived with her, what would you say?
Relevancy.
Sustained.
Did you have a good relationship with Kathy during the period of time when she lived with you?
Yes, I had a good relationship.
During that time period, did you ever observe, strike that, how would you describe Bob and Kathy's relationship at the time that they were living with you in the Katona house?
At that time, they had a very good relationship.
Did you ever see any violence at that time?
No, I never saw any violence when we were living there.
Did you ever observe any emotional abuse in your presence?
No, I never saw any emotional abuse at that time.
At the time that you lived with them, did Kathy ever express to you that she was ever afraid of Bob?
No, she never did.
Do you remember the approximate time period when Bob and Kathy bought the Lakeside Cottage on Hoyt Street in South Salem?
I do. It was 1974.
And they eventually end up moving into that home as well as the Riverside Drive and East 86th Street properties in New York City, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Did you ever visit Kathy at the South Salem cottage?
Yes, we visited it several times.
And was that a situation where you had a visit with Bob and Kathy? What were the circumstances of you seeing Kathy at the South Salem house?
I don't recall the exact circumstances, but we made, it wasn't, maybe 3 at the most visits to the house.
Did you have interactions at that time with your brother?
Yes,
And were the two of you at least able to be in the same room at that time?
yes, we were civil to each other at that time.
Do you remember specifically Kathy starting medical school?
I remember her specifically starting nursing school and then medical school, yes.
By the way, there has been an allegation that Kathy Durst was admitted to medical school because of your family connections. Do you have any knowledge of any family connections and any influence that was utilized to get her into Albert Einstein College of Medicine?
I do know there was a connection to the school. My grandfather was one of the founders of the school, but I don't have any knowledge or never heard that that was used to get her into the school.
Can you tell me, did you become aware once Bob and Kathy moved to the South Salem house that their relationship deteriorated?
Yes, our visits became less frequent because it was very uncomfortable being together with the two of them in the house. It was a lot of tension.
And this is something that you had seen firsthand?
Yes.
Although you saw tension, did you ever observe Bob to be violent with Kathy?
No, I never saw violence.
And Mr. Durst, I assume that as you sit here today, you understand that your brother is on trial, and you understand that the situation with Kathy Durst is a part of this case, correct?
Yes, I understand that.
So do you also understand that obviously if you yourself had witnessed such violence, that that could potentially be helpful to the people's case? You understand that, correct?
I do understand that.
So I just want to be clear, the reason you are answering that you didn't observe any violence is not because you don't think it would be helpful, it's because it's just not what happened, correct?
That's correct.
I want to ask you, when I say the name Peter Schwartz, is that a name that you've heard of?
I've heard the name, yes.
And are you aware of an assault that happened where your brother kicked him in the face?
Calls for hearsay.
I had no personal knowledge except what I read in the papers.
Did you ever discuss the
Move to
incident?
strike.
It's foundational to the next question, Your Honor.
Okay, so overruled.
Did you ever discuss the incident involving Peter Schwartz with your brother?
No, I did not.
Now, in the following area, one moment. I want you to listen very carefully. I'm going to ask you a yes or no question only. So do you understand?
I do.
Did Kathy ever mention to you anything about Bob stealing from the Durst organization?
Objection.
Sustained. Irrelevant.
You know, the court's already made a rule.
Oh, wait,
Yes.
I see. You're,
If I can approach sidebar, Your Honor, I can.
no, I'm going to overrule the objection. I'm recalling the limits of the inquiry.
So
Overruled.
you're only answering yes or no. Did Kathy ever mention to you anything about Bob stealing from the Durst organization?
Yes,
When did this happen?
this happened in Christmas 1980.
I want to ask you, when I say the name Prudence Farrow, is that somebody you are familiar with?
I'm familiar with the name.
And do you have any personal knowledge of the nature of she and Bob's relationship?
My only personal knowledge is that Bob rented an apartment to her.
And when you say rented an apartment, would that have been a Durst organization apartment?
Yes.
And are you aware, was there anything unusual about the rental of that apartment?
It was unusual for Bob to rent apartments to friends of his, yes.
And when you say rent, was it your understanding that that rental agreement was at a below market rate?
Yes.
And in terms of other individuals that you knew Bob to do this for, is it fair to say that the only one you're aware of other than that is the apartment for Kathy Durst?
That is correct, yes.
And that apartment for Kathy came soon after she and Bob met, is that correct?
I believe so.
I want to ask you, I want to go to Bob and Kathy's relationship much nearer to the time of her disappearance. What, if anything, did you know about the status of their marriage at that time? So we're going now in the future near January of 1982.
Basis of knowledge, hearsay.
Kathy had told me that she was seeking a divorce from Bob.
And do you recall specifically when she told you that?
It was in the winter of 1980. I don't remember if it was at the Christmas party or not.
Now, your brother has repeatedly stated that your family, particularly your father, did not want Bob and Kathy to get a divorce. Do you know if that is a true statement?
I don't. My family has had a number of divorces in it, so I have no reason to believe that that would be a true statement.
Your brother has also mentioned that divorces were not acceptable in the family because of how they would affect family trust. Is that an accurate statement?
The divorce would not affect the family trust, and my uncle was divorced. It was a sort of messy divorce, so it's not a situation that nobody would have objected to it.
So I just wanted to make sure, so you're saying that there have been divorces in your family of individuals who are members of the trust, and that those divorces did not impact in any way the family trust going forward.
That is correct.
I want to talk about Kathy's disappearance for a moment. Do you remember when Kathy disappeared?
Yes, I do.
And can you tell me, how did you find out?
Bob called me to tell me that she was missing.
And at the time that he called you, do you remember when this was?
It was the week of, first week of February.
And if it helps, I want you to assume for a moment that February 1st was a Monday,
So it was
1982.
Wednesday.
And do you recall when he called you, what was his demeanor?
It was, his tone was very neutral, and there was no great anxiety in his tone.
Did that seem unusual to you at the time?
It seemed a little strange, yes.
Do you have any knowledge of what happened to Kathy?
I have no knowledge, no.
Did you have anything to do with her disappearance?
Absolutely not.
Do you have any knowledge that your father had anything to do with her disappearance?
Absolutely not.
Did you have anything to do with covering up whatever Mr. Durst might have done to her?
I find that a very insulting question, but no, I did not.
And are you aware if your father had any involvement in allegedly covering up?
I have no knowledge of it, and I also find that insulting.
At the time that you talked to your brother Bob, did he mention to you that they had been arguing the night that Kathy disappeared?
He did not, no.
And is that something you think you would remember?
Absolutely.
Did he mention to you that they had actually had a physical altercation prior to her alleged departure on the train that night?
No, he did not.
And again, is that something that you believe you would remember?
Absolutely.
Did he mention to you at the time that he believed that her disappearance was related to cocaine use?
He did. I believe he said, I recall him saying something about a drug user had been to the apartment, a drug dealer had been to the apartment.
And let me ask you something. In the interactions that you had with Kathy, did you ever observe her to be acting consistently with a cocaine addict?
No, I never saw that.
Do you remember anything else that he told you about, specifically about Kathy's alleged disappearance?
He told me that he put her on a train and he hadn't heard from her since.
Who was Florence Jones?
Florence Jones was Bob's assistant secretary, assistant/.
And did you ever speak to Flo Jones about Kathy's disappearance?
I did not, no.
And is your understanding now that Flo Jones is deceased?
If she tells me she is, then that would be my understanding.
I want to talk about specifically the week of Kathy's alleged disappearance, and I want to go to Monday, February 1st, 19...
Is this a logical time?
Yeah, absolutely.
Break? Our reporters have been
Sure.
going a while. So I will... I'll remind you to not speak with any other witness during this break. Ladies and gentlemen, do not converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with this case. Do not form or express any opinion on the case. We'll let the jurors exit, and then you may step down during the break.
Your Honor, before the jurors exit,
Yes.
would the court consider inquiring whether if we set up this TV flush against that back rail there, so it's kind of out of the way, whether that would work for them, their viewing situation?
I expect it would be fine. So if we can do that without toppling it and breaking it again.
We'll wait till they go, Your Honor.
Yes. All right. Please,